Now you can see the same presentation in some of the previous videos from prior semesters, but I'll review it here as well in case there's some questions that some of you have that are online. So the intro to web development, I broke it down into 3 PowerPoints. The first one covers the first 2 bullets about domain names and IP addresses and browser-side technology. The second part of this will be a PowerPoint presentation that covers the server-side technology and some web development tools. And the third part will cover the last 2 bullets, which is search engine optimization and content management system and development frameworks. For this course, I'm going to, instead of going through an in-depth description like I've done in prior semesters, I'm going to kind of cycle through this very quickly, just so you have a rough idea of what we're covering. In general, we're talking about some technologies of how does a web browser find a web page somewhere on the internet. So I'll answer some of the questions of what does a domain name find, how does a domain name find a website, what's an IP address, what's a web host, and what's the purpose of domain name systems. So as a brief description, not the long one, but when you end up getting a domain name, first of all, you need to register it. And that's similar to like registering a fictitious business name. And once you've got a domain name registered, then it at least protects you so that no one else steals that same name. And usually it's kind of rented. You're kind of like renting it for a year or more. And it's your license to use that for that year. When it expires, it may be free for somebody else to use that name. The other thing you're going to have to do is that name is going to translate into an IP address. And that IP address is kind of like a phone number for the internet. Where on the internet can I find your web host or your web pages? So it ends up going to your web hosting server. That actually is the destination. So when your browser says go to mydomain.com, it converts it to an IP address. That IP address goes back to the web server, and it says, great, let me go ahead and give that page back to the browser. This DNS piece right here, I was telling you the domain name ends up getting converted to an IP address. And this is very similar to a phone book that you would end up using. And I'm dating myself since there's no phone books anymore, but you used to be able to look up your name into the phone book and say, I'm looking for Joe Smith's phone number. And when you find Joe Smith, it ends up giving you the phone number so you can call him and actually make contact with Joe Smith. Well, DNS is very similar, but that's the internet version of it. So it takes the domain name that you put in, and it goes into the internet's address book to find it. And once it finds it, turns it to an IP address. The IP address takes you to the web host, and we move forward. Okay. This isn't a perfect example with this flow chart here, but it gives you a rough idea of what happens. Also for domain names, there's a top-level domain, second-level domain, and even a third-level domain. Now the top-level domain, most people thought it's the first part of your domain name, like the www part, but it's not. It's actually the very end part of the domain name, the .com, .org, .gov, and so on. And these are actually being controlled. Some of them are controlled by the domain name registrars, so that .com is for company, .org is for organizations, .gov is for government agencies, and like .edu is for education. The .com and the .org and even the .net are readily available for you to purchase. But for you to get a domain with ending in .gov or .edu, because they're controlled by governments and education organizations, they're harder for you to get. So you have to be more official. One thing that I like to do is when I'm looking for a website and I want to make sure it's legitimate, I want to say, well, does the site end in .gov? For example, there's whitehouse.gov, but there's also whitehouse.com. The .gov one is more official, and you're looking at some information from the White House. The .com might have been something that somebody else purchased just to spoof the website. The second level domain is some of the domains that we're able to purchase. So if I have something like a widget company and I want to find out if I can have widgets.com, that's second level domain name. Now, some of them you have to go a little bit further. For example, these bottom ones over here, the one with UK, JP, and AU, those are, well, let me back up. UK, JP, and EU, these are top level domains, but they're run by countries. So this is United Kingdom, Japan, and Australia. So the second level domain for these organizations, some of them say co.uk. That's the same thing as companies in the UK. And they don't sell second level domain names over in this area. They sell the third level domain name. So if I had widgets, it'll be widgets.co.uk, for example. Third level domain is pretty interesting because if I ended up having a second level domain that I purchased, it means you almost have control of everything that's to the left. If you own aboutsafe.org, then you might be able to create your third level domain of www.aboutsafe.org or home.aboutsafe.org or secure.aboutsafe.org. Whatever you wanted to do here, you may have the power to add some sub-level domains over to your domain name. So as you can see, the architecture of this, guardian.co.uk, UK controls everything to the left, co.uk controls the companies in the UK and everything to the left. And then if you own Guardian, you can end up working with Guardian and everything to the left of that for fourth level domain, fifth level domain, and so on. How do I end up getting some of these domain names? Well, there's two main organizations that you'll be working with. One of them is called ICANN, which is the International Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And the other one is CCTLD, which is Country Code Top Level Domain Authority. This one you probably don't have access to. This is like when I was talking about the UK and the JP and the AU top level domains. Those are country code top level domain names. ICANN usually handles the rest. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about that is ICANN opened up, instead of being American English letters and numbers, they internationalized it to where you could actually use Hebrew and Arabic and so on. So if you tried to kind of like say, hey, I know everybody's going to go with bitcoin.com and I'm going to say bitcoin.net, bitcoin.org and stuff like that. Well, if you tried to purchase it before you thought Bitcoin was going to be big or something like that, or let's say some other name, Newcoin or whatever. If you tried to do that and you tried to purchase a domain name in advance, your job just got harder because now not only do you need the .com, .net, and .org and .mobi, you may need to have the equivalent in other languages of Hebrew or Arabic or Japanese or whatever it is. So it got a lot tougher with the domain names. Domain name registrars, there's several places where you could register your domain name. You could use whois to look up a domain name. I don't think Ergoware exists anymore. That one went away, so I may need to change that. But you'll be able to find out some details about who owns a particular domain name there. NSLOOKUP, you can end up using that in a terminal window of the Mac or command terminal over in Windows. And you could type in NSLOOKUP and find out some information about different domain names. If you know the IP address, you might be able to hit the host server but they got a little bit more sophisticated now, so you almost need the host name with the IP address. But in essence, this is the old school way. You could still go to http:// type an IP name, an IP number, IP address in there, and it'll take you to the host server to do some testing and so on. Now, protocol-wise, we end up using HTTP, saying I'm just going to communicate normally. HTTPS says I'm going to talk to it encrypted. FTP : says I'm almost going to do a file share and move files to and from there. And these ports that we're talking about over here are different ways of getting into that server. I end up looking at it like different doors. Port 80 is like the front door. Port 443, since it's encrypted, is the secret password door. And port 21 is almost like the loading dock in the back where you can upload or download files, and that's port 21. The hosting server, when you hit a website, the hosting server is doing most of the work. That's where most of your files are located for your website. And you could use your desktop computer as a hosting server if you had a dedicated IP address. Now, the downside of that is you're using your own bandwidth and traffic going to your physical house, I guess you could say. And the drawback could be is if there's a power outage in your house, your website went down too. Plus, if you're using a really low bandwidth is amount of bits that can go back and forth. If you think of like you have a really slow modem, then anybody visiting your site is going to have a very slow experience when trying to load images or videos from your home computer. That's why people end up using hosting services, so that they get more of a stronger direct connection to the internet, and they'll get faster response. Things to look for in hosting servers. In a nutshell, you may want to make sure you've got the right technology in place for the operating system, the web server, IIS or Apache, disk space, bandwidth is the amount of data that can travel to and from your system and how fast. Do they offer email? Do they offer a control panel where I can change my settings? And what programming languages and databases are available? Okay, so that's it for IP addresses and so on. And next I'm going to cover really briefly is the browser side technology, and this is going to be even super fast. In terms of the browser side technology, the things you could do on a browser without having a web server is you could do HTML, you could do CSS, and you could do JavaScript, and you can end up taking those files and looking at it in your local browser, even if you don't have internet access at all. And if you want to find out more about it, I would end up looking at, if you're a little bit rusty on your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I highly recommend going to w3schools.com. It ends up giving you some great tutorials on how to write HTML and the syntax, same as CSS, same as JavaScript. So anyway, this is a few slides giving you more information on HTML, on CSS, and on JavaScript. And some basics about the web browser. The images that you use, I have to add one more to this. You can't take just any like Photoshop file, save it, and say, great, I want to display it on a web page. Browsers only recognize JPEGs, GIFs, PNGs, and a new one called SVG, which is for scalable vector graphics. Back in the old days, you had to use a plugin if you wanted to use something like Flash and so on, but new to HTML5, they're allowing us to take MP3s and MP4s, and so that you'll be able to use the newer tags, and your browsers should be able to handle that type of file now. All right. Any questions? So that's all I'm going to give you as a nutshell for your opening session. Again, I'm going to have a lot of last year's videos or last term's videos available for you, and I'll put them in a subfolder. And when we have these weekly sessions, try to use it more as lab. So try to save your questions for the Monday and say, post to the discussion board. I'll try to look at the discussion board and maybe answer them in the video session, whether people are here or not. And if you miss a session, if you didn't miss the Monday or you were busy on that Monday night, you can always go back over to the Blackboard site. And you should be able to go to that particular week. Like this one right here. And I'll post the videos just like you could see right here. These two are going to be thrown into a folder, and this session that I just recorded will display down here. It's real easy. Just click here. You'll be able to go and watch the video and move forward. If you want to see a complete listing of the videos, I have this class video playlist like I mentioned before. And as the course progresses, you'll see a second, third video, and so on. For each week that comes up after these sessions, and I close my Zoom session, I spend a little bit of time to let it render, move it over to the YouTube site, and you'll start seeing all the lists down below. Okay, so only question I have is we meet on Monday and Wednesday at 6 p.m.? No, today we're meeting on Wednesday because I didn't quite lock down the schedule. And I just received that I was teaching this class on Friday of last week, so I didn't organize my schedule very well. After a little bit of juggling, from this point forward, we're going to be having these sessions only on Monday nights at 6 p.m. because I have another obligation on Wednesday nights from this point forward.
Do we have an assignment for this week? Can we go over our homework assignment for this week 1?
Sure. So let me stop and start this.